video recording from today. So I'd like to begin though by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all gathered, noting that we are dialing in, as I said, from all parts of Victoria this afternoon. But for us here at Edrolo HQ in Melbourne, it is the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and any Indigenous, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us this afternoon. So thank you again for joining us. We are aiming for about an hour online together, so aiming for about 5 o'clock. I will hand over shortly to Merav, who's going to be talking to us this afternoon, and Merav has planned to stop at a few key points to open it up for questions, and we'll be using that Q&A function that you can see on your screen there for that, just to make sure that we can track any questions that come in. I have got on the screen here now, just quickly, we're super excited to be launching our new Year 7 resources for maths and science, with humanities coming later this year. So if you do have any colleagues teaching Year 7 science or maths, please do let them know. It's beautiful textbooks and digital products, the same amazing quality that you've come to expect from Edrolo, now available for Year 7. So please pass on that information to any of your colleagues. And I have also just shared here the channels in terms of staying across all things Edrolo. If you're not already following us on any of the social channels, please do. We're certainly getting more active in that space and sharing news, lesson tips, lesson ideas, all sorts of content, as well as some giveaways coming up. So do head on over to social so you can stay across things like future professional learning like today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Merav, and I'm going to stick around to help field and help and sort any questions out. But over to you, Merav.
Thank you very much, Clinton. Can we hear me okay?
Loud and clear for me.
Fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you coming after a long day of teaching. My name's Merav. I'll introduce myself properly in a few minutes. But before we begin, I just want to find out who is with us today. So quite a few of you have already introduced yourselves in the chat. If you haven't done that already, let us know what your name is, where you're teaching, and perhaps if you're teaching year 11 or 12, just so people start gathering names and ideas of people they can contact if they would like to connect with colleagues. I can already see some names that I recognise from the VCE Psychology Teachers Facebook group and other professional learning that we've been a part of. So it's really exciting to have you all here. My name is Merav. You may recognise me. I have presented at CDES for the last couple of years, and I've taught English and psychology for a number of years now. I'm currently working as the lead author of Team Psych here at Edrolo, and I'm really excited about the new content and everything that we get to present to you guys today. So without further ado, let's jump in. The first thing I want to, get a sense of is, where are you at with the new content? Is the new study design something that you have managed to take a look at yet? And how are you feeling about it? So as a bit of an icebreaker, I know we're online, but you found the chat function already. When you think about the new study design, which Ross from Friends, which Ross image best represents how you feel? Are you excited about it? Are you a little bit nervous about it? Are you a bit overwhelmed? How are we feeling? We've got quite a few different numbers coming about. Anna is a number 10 down here. Chloe is a number 6. She's feeling fine. Cassie is a 1, screaming into the void. Cassie, I'm pretty sure you're in very good company here. Leah is more of an 8, perhaps feeling a bit unsure. I think it's really good to see, however you are feeling at the moment about the new content, there is someone who is in the same boat as you. Some people will have really looked into the new study design and know what's coming. Other people are here to find out about it for the very first time. So hopefully, no matter where you are, can I say them all? Donna, absolutely, you can say them all. I think there's a lot of mixed feelings in the room. So hopefully by the end of today, we will be able to help you understand the content changes in each area of study, and get inspired with activities that you can run in your classrooms. Not only what the content is, but also how Edrolo is going to help you really bring that content to life and implement these changes. As a disclaimer, we don't speak for the VCEA. We're going to talk to the content that we are developing and hopefully be able to answer your questions about the Edrolo products along the way. So how are we going to do all of that? We're first going to look at the content changes throughout units 1 to 4 and areas of study 1 and 2. So we will not look at research methods in the first little bit, but don't worry, we will get to it later on in the presentation. We're then going to have a look at some of Edrolo's approach to activities and what you can expect from the textbook. And then we're going to move focus to everybody's favorite key science skills and area of study 3, all of the research methods content that you will need. And last but not least, we'll end off with looking at the assessment changes. We are going to stop along the way for questions. So if you do have a question that comes up as we're talking, the wonderful part about being online is that you can pop the question into the Q&A function. So that's not the chat function. It's the Q&A function. And that way, if the same question is coming up again and again, we can prioritize that and we'll answer it to the best of our ability. So with all that in mind, let's jump in. So we're going to start with units 1 to 4, looking at areas of study 1 and 2. So the way we're going to do this is as follows. I will speak to each area of study within each unit. There'll be a blue table like this. These slides, I believe, have been emailed to you ahead of time. So you're welcome to take a look or write notes, however suits you, while we go through them. And I want you to think about a plus, so something that like you're really happy and excited about, perhaps a minus, something that you're a little bit worried about, and an interesting. So it's neither here nor there, but it's worth noting in your mind. And after each section of the study design that we go through, I will stop and I'll field questions if there are any. So we'll do it bit by bit together. So let's start with unit 1. I hope that you can read this table clearly, but I will speak to it anyway. So starting with unit 1, there is a significant structural change in that areas of study 1 and 2 have been swapped. So we're now starting with psychological development, and then area of study 2 is all about the brain and mental processes. So a little bit different to what we're used to in the last study design. There's a little bit of content that's also been removed and some content that's been added. So if we have a look at area of study 1, what influences psychological development, we can see that in those influences on psych development, there's no more twin and adoption studies, and there's no more explicit mention of Harlow, Ainsworth, Piaget, Erikson, those theorists that we have come to associate with teaching psychological development. Doesn't mean that we can't include them in our lessons if we find them interesting, and that you guys can't use them as examples and so on and so forth, but they're no longer explicitly in the dot point. And the interesting thing about this, I put it in the removed section there, but it really is more a shift than a removal, is that there's a bit of a conceptual change in this area of study. So where it used to be very much atypical development and that mental health sort of lens to look at these concepts through, it's now very much psychological development. So we can see what that looks like a little bit when we have a look at what's been added. What's been added are things like the new dot point of the biopsychosocial model. So that moved from atypical to a focus of psychological development. We've also got some content around neurotypicality and neurodiversity and what that looks like and what that means. And excitingly, we also are looking at the role of mental health workers. So that includes culturally responsive practices. you'll see throughout the study design, there's more and more emphasis on cultural responsivity and cultural responsibility within the psychological field. And this is just one area that it pops up in. And it's pretty exciting to be able to explore with students not only sort of the theory of psychology, but also the practice and what it actually looks like. So that's area of study 1 in a nutshell. Area of study 2, how are mental processes and behaviours influenced by the brain? There's quite a bit of content that's been removed from here. So you'll notice that neurons, nervous system, Parkinson's disease have all been removed from the study design. There's a focus on adaptive plasticity rather than developmental. So we still look at brain plasticity, but very much in terms of that brain injury and rehabilitation setting. Interestingly, what's been added are specific dot points about acquired brain injury, including CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is really interesting to look at in terms of sport and concussions. And also there's been an emphasis on contemporary research put in there. So looking at CTE in particular as an example of how psychology is evolving in this day and age. So what I'll do before we move on to the next area of study, there's a lot of information on these slides. So I'm going to pause for a moment. And if there are any questions about Unit 1 in particular, you can pop them into the Q&A now and we'll have a go at answering some. I can see a question from Mary that's come through. I will give people a minute or two because typing is slower than talking. Will we still look at the structure of the brain and lobes? Yes, that is still in there. Looking at sort of that, there's a dot point about hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain, and then cerebral cortex. So you'll still get to delve into the bits and pieces of the brain. Any other questions?
A couple have just come into the Q&A, Merav.
Yes, we've got a comment. Unit 1 has always segued nicely into Unit 3. I wonder if they considered the logical swap of Unit 1 and Unit 2 in the new study design, because I think we'll stick with doing Unit 2 first again. David, that's a great point. I can't comment on that as I'm not working with VCAA, but as with every study design, teachers are welcome to teach it in whichever order they see fit. And Patrick has a question. Does a lack of understanding of neurons and neural signaling limit students' comprehension of how ABIs and CTE may truly affect an individual? That's a really interesting question, Patrick. And whilst I'm not 100% sure in that context, in ABIs and CTE, how, you know, the depth that's needed within the dot point, if not understanding neurons is a problem there, it is interesting to see how in different areas of the study design, and we'll see this when we get to year 12 especially, there is a certain level of understanding of what neurons are and how they work that's required as implied knowledge to access some of the other dot points. So it is something that you may still find that you would like to teach, even if it's not quite in as much depth as was demanded by the last study design. Great questions. If there are more coming through, that's totally fine. We will continue to pause, and we'll also have time at the very end to answer any questions that haven't been answered. So if something comes up for you, just feel free to pop it in and we will get to it when we get a chance. But if that's it for Unit 1, let's move on to Unit 2. Again, you'll see that structurally Area of Study 1 and Area of Study 2 have been swapped. So Area of Study 1 is all about how people are influenced to behave in particular ways, all that social psychology element. And then area of study 2 is all about perception and what influences a person's perception on the world. So we'll start with area of study 1, how people influence to behave in particular ways, and that social cognition element. So first and foremost, the first dot point is fundamentally the same, but they've added keywords of decision-making and interpersonal interaction. So they are giving you a little bit more guidance in what we really mean by social cognition and what we're trying to determine the impact on. You'll notice that status and power have been removed, and explicit reference to Zimbardo, Milgram, and Ash have also been removed. But don't worry, as it says on the slide, you can still talk about them if you love them. I know that I love to teach some of those classic studies and pick them apart from an ethics perspective and a sound research perspective. So there's still definitely room to introduce those as examples. They're no longer explicitly in the dot point. Really excitingly, they've added some great content into this area of study. So you've got a lesson on cognitive biases and cognitive dissonance. You've got a lesson on heuristics and how they impact decision-making and interpersonal interactions. You've got influence of social groups and culture. So while we sort of had status and power last year, we've now got social groups and culture. And there's a dot point that's been added on anti-conformity and independence, which is really exciting. And you can see that narrative being built about what influences us in social groups and how can we actually be aware of and work to perhaps break those molds in order to create positive social change. So it's a really exciting dot point that they've added. And there's a bit of a reframing in that classic media dot point. So in the last study design, it was very much about particular types of media and then generally what their influence is. This time around, it's more about the actual influence. So the dot point outlines how it influences, for example, your social connections, how it influences your access to information, et cetera, et cetera. But there's less direction of what particular media you're looking at. In area of study 2, there is a really interesting shift. So it's now about perception. So sensation in its entirety have been removed. So some of you may be quite excited to hear that because there's no longer learning about different parts of the eye and different structures in taste buds and so on and so forth, because there's really the focus on the perception side of things rather than sensation. There is a new general sort of perception dot point that includes attention. So it goes through sustained, divided, and selective attention and how that really is the starting point of all perception. It's also added some top-down and bottom-up processing in perception. Agnosia and spatial neglect are also some really interesting perceptual conditions that are explored, and having a look at those things in context of when perception perhaps goes awry. And last but not least, in the sort of perceptual set elements, you've got miraculin and supertaster. So looking at some biological and other influences on perception that perhaps create different taste experiences as well. So that's it for Unit 2. I'll once again pause for a moment. And if there are any questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we will try and answer them as best as we can. David says in the chat that heuristics used to be a part of the Unit 3 and 4 study design in the 90s. So they've brought it back. It's very exciting. Melissa, I can see your question about when textbooks will be published. I think I'll save that one for the end. So don't worry, I will get to it. But I think if there are any questions on the content in particular at this point. Awesome. Great. So we will, let's move on. Our next bit is Unit 3. So let's have a look at the Year 12 course. You'll see there are quite a few changes to go through here. And overall, in Unit 3 and 4, there has been a reduction of content. So in some places, it's a little bit deceiving, but I think overall there has been a reduction. So let's have a look at Area of Study 1, first of all. So that is all about nervous system functioning. So once again, you'll notice that structure and functions of neurons have been removed, although you may still require teaching a little bit of it in less detail just to get a starting point with the nervous system. The lock and key process is now no longer in the study design as well, and the dot point regarding Parkinson's disease has also been removed. In regards to stress, that is a fairly similar content, but sources of stress, those daily life pressures, intercultural stresses and things like that, they have been removed from that dot point. Instead, what you can look forward to is the addition of neuromodulators, dopamine and serotonin. So they have now been separated from neurotransmitters, and there's a bit of a comparison going on. You can also look forward to sprouting, rerouting and pruning instead of that lock and key process. So there's still that exploration of generally what synaptic plasticity looks like without the stress of learning all the bits and pieces of the lock and key process. And probably the dot point that I'm most excited for, the inclusion of the gut-brain axis. So that's in the stress section of Area of Study 1. And it's really cool to see you still cover your biological and your psychological processes of stress, and then they come together in this emerging area of research to see how our stomachs and our brains work together in that stress response. I think it's going to be really fun to explore. In Area of Study 2, how do people learn and remember? One of my favourite areas to teach. VCEA has removed stimulus generalization, discrimination, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. So we no longer have to cover those areas so much. Little Albert and the ethical quandaries associated with him are no longer in the study design. And that section on reliability of memory, so everything to do with retrieval methods, rehearsal, zero position effect, Loftus, all of those have been removed. Instead, excitingly, you see some content regarding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives that have been included really meaningfully. So you've got a dot point about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander approaches to learning and what that looks like. You've got some additions to the brain regions of memory, so specifically the neocortex and basal ganglia and their role in memory. And the focus on episodic and semantic memory and types of that have been sort of reimagined, and they are explored in context of Alzheimer's disease and aphantasia. So looking at how these disorders impact individuals. And last but not least, there is a new dot point, or rather a recycled dot point. I remember this one from when I did Year 12 Psych a number of years ago, but mnemonics have been re-included in the study design. So specifically looking at mnemonics in written cultures like acronyms, acrostics, and the method of loci, and comparing that to mnemonics in oral cultures, such as sung narratives and songlines. So a specific emphasis on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures in that dot point, and looking at the two of them and how they work. So I will pause once again. I can already see some questions coming through. Patrick asks, is there any PD available for teachers in order to authentically and properly teach the dot point on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander approaches to learning beyond external resources? Exciting to have, but nervous about doing it properly. I really appreciate that, Patrick, and I can completely understand that this is very new to many, many teachers, and the need to do it authentically and accurately, and sensitively as well. Edrolo is not offering any PD in the space at this point in time, but what I would encourage you, if you are at a public school, you can reach out to your QESO. Generally speaking, there are people within the department who can come out to your school and run some training for your teachers, possibly more generally and also in relation to these dot points as well. That would be my #1 bit of advice. And also Erin Wilson, the head of the psychology team at VCAA, I'm sure that if you email her to explain that that's something that you're after, the VCAA may be providing something in the future, but I'm not sure. There's a comment from Cassie in the chat that it will be difficult not to teach structures and functions of neurons thoroughly with concepts such as the spinal reflex and how neurons change through adaptation. Cassie, that's very true. And chances are you will have to teach elements of neuron structure and function in order to explain the spinal reflex and other such things. But just know, I guess, if it's not in the study design, it possibly shouldn't be tested on in that way. Any other questions? Okay, we'll soldier on because we want to make sure that we get you guys out of here on time. Last unit 4, sleep and mental well-being. So there's been quite a significant reduction in content for this one. And restructuring means that some of the dot points have sort of been moved around, but the content is largely the same. There's no longer any content about the nature of consciousness per se, but that area of study 1 is really exclusively about sleep. So you'll see that the consciousness continuum and features of consciousness have been removed. When it comes to measuring sleep, there's been a focus on more the EEGs, EOGs, EMGs, and then your sleep diaries and your video monitoring. So cognitive tasks is no longer a part of it. There's been a change of non-REM stages 1 to 4 are now non-REM stages 1 to 3. So hopefully that makes it a little bit less ambiguous, because I know some students really struggled with differentiating between those stages 3 and 4. There's no more brainwaves, no more dysomnias and parasomnias, and CBT as a treatment for sleep disorder has been removed. What has been added, or rather changed a little bit, because delayed sleep phase onset was a part of the old study design when it came to teenagers and sleep, you now have advanced sleep phase disorder and delayed sleep phase syndrome as a dot point. And there is a dot point about improving sleep hygiene and adaptation to life givers. If you do speak German and you know how badly I just butchered that word, I apologize. But there's some really exciting content there to teach students how to really get the most and the best quality sleep possible. In area of study 2, which is all about mental well-being, some very familiar content, but ethical implications in studying mental health has been removed, and risk factors and cumulative risk have been removed as well. Additionally, when it comes to that treating phobia content, exercise has been removed as a treatment to phobia, which I think makes sense to me. So I hope it makes sense to you too. Instead, what's been added is the social and emotional well-being framework for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's all about in what mental well-being actually looks like for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. They have also changed diet to adequate nutrition and hydration. So I think specifying what that actually means. They've included mindfulness as a method for maintaining well-being in addition to CBT. And once again, as I said in year 11, really bringing in that cultural competency perspective for our students. They have included cultural determinants of well-being for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as a dot point as well. So a little bit of new content, a little bit of familiar content. really exciting to see. Any questions about Unit 4 before we move on to the next section of our presentation? If you're anything like me and you're experiencing a bit of information overload, the questions will come to you in the middle of the night tonight. That's okay. We will let you know how you can get hold of us if questions come up a little bit later. So I just want to pause for a moment in terms of the content of the new study design and talk about a new feature of our textbook and how we are going to help you create engagement and build up assessment skills. An example of some of these activities were emailed out to you before the presentation. So if you'd like to take a look at them, you're welcome to, but I will talk through some of them now. So in the Edrolo textbook for 2023, there are 4 types of activities that will be found throughout the textbook. Those are reflect and respond, which is where students are given some sort of stimulus, whether it's a video or an article, something interesting to engage with, and they're asked to perhaps have a class discussion or answer some questions about it, really think about it and how it applies to what they're learning. Create and annotate is all about exactly what it sounds like, creating and annotating, creating anything from mind maps to 3D models to whatever it is that will be able to show them how content fits together and bring it off the page. We've also got a practical investigation type of activity, which is really exciting. The practical investigation type is very much that classic logbook activity. I know that there'll be a number of teachers, myself included, who the logbook is a bit of a mysterious beast and we were never quite sure if we were getting it right, but it is an opportunity to really bring research methods into the content that the students are learning. So we've actually got 2 sort of subtypes of those practical investigations. The first one is all about the practical experiments that you can run in your classroom, and the second one is more theoretical based. So really thinking about designing experiments, thinking about bringing research methods into the area of study 1 and 2 content that you might be learning. And last but not least, we've got check your understandings, which are generally what you expect in textbook questions, a moment to stop, some formative assessment for students to perhaps fill in the blanks or match terms and things like that. So I do want to take a moment to really just talk through what these activities will look like. In the examples you've got, that is not the final copy, so they will look quite different when they're published properly, but the content itself are examples of activities that we will be including. And these are some of the features within these activities that you can expect to find and some of the thought processes that the team has been putting into it. So this is your basic check your understanding. That formative assessment type activity we were talking about. We're really emphasizing a couple of things as we're writing them. So the first thing that we want to emphasize is choice. We want to be able to give you as teachers choices of how you present this to your class, choices of perhaps which students do which bit of the activity. And we want to also give students choices so that they can sometimes say, I'm more interested in option A than B, and perhaps build engagement from there. Within those choices, we're putting a lot of thought into differentiation. So one of the things that we're aware of is that our teachers and students using our products are coming from varying contexts all over Victoria. And so we really want to make sure that we are supporting struggling students and extending thriving students and really challenging those thriving students to apply the content in a more a deeper way. So you'll notice here, for example, task 1, this is all about attributions in Unit 1. So we're looking at task 1 being labeling the following scenarios as either internal or external attribution. So a more low level understand type task, can they recognize these two types of attributions? Whereas task 2, even though it's the same content, it's really asking students to apply and push themselves in their thinking by coming up with their own attribution, internal and external, for each of those kind of scenarios. So just a little bit more of a detailed understanding. And because we don't want any student to be put off trying some of the harder activities, we are including some helpful hints as well to help out struggling students, giving them a starting point, perhaps some vocabulary to use or a hint about where to get started so that they can jump into the challenging activities as well. So we're really excited about some of these features, and we hope that you are too. So let's move on. I see that time is ticking away very quickly, as it tends to do in these presentations. So let's move on to research methods and key science skills, as I know that that is a particular area that people really want to hear about. So let's jump into it. Key science skills. There are a couple of structural changes in the cross-unit capabilities here. There are some wording changes to overall key science skill categories. So if you're looking at the study design, you've got your key science skills table. I'm talking about the left-hand side column. And some of the dot points have also been moved around a little bit. So they're in slightly different places to what you're used to. In terms of the true content, you can expect to find that there's been a change to language around research methodologies. So it used to refer to things like observational studies, self-report, questionnaires, interviews, rating scales, all that jazz. It now looks at different types of research like classification and identification, field work, literature review, correlational study, your regular type of experimental designs and research methodologies. Really, really wonderfully, all of these new terms are defined for you on page 14 of the study design. So you don't need to guess what on earth they mean. They're all there for you. What's been added is a slight change of wording. So where we used to really talk about within and between, where we used to talk about things like independent groups, repeated measures, all that jazz, we now talk about within subjects, between subjects, and mixed design. So although both sets of terminology is useful and you'll need them at different points in time, the dot point now uses this terminology. They've also added in the concepts of uncertainty, accuracy, and precision, in addition to the regular old validity and reliability. They have included calculating percentages and percentage change. So calculating percentages was in the previous study design, but they've added that percentage change there. Students do not have calculators in exams, so that it's not something I think that they'll have to calculate in an exam sort of section, but knowing the theory behind it, knowing how it applies to research and things like that is really important. And there's been the inclusion of cultural biases and relevancy as part of evaluating research. And that's throughout units 1 to 4. It comes up again and again and again, this idea of cultural relevancy and seeing how one actually applies research. So in terms of generalizability, using that cultural lens to understand whether or not something is generalizable. And they've given you a key glossary, a key terms glossary on pages 19 to 22 of the study design. So once again, all of these new terms, they're all defined for you and your students so that everybody's on the same page about what it all means, which is really exciting. Before I jump into our area of study 3s across the whole study design, are there any specific questions about the key science skills in particular? Has the research analysis task from unit 1 been removed? I'm going to go through that in 1 second, Cassie. I'll show you what each section looks like. This is more about that research method stuff on that will show up on exams and things like that. Patrick says, nope, but a whole lot of work is going into reworking all those research method PowerPoints and tasks. Yes, there will be work put into that, Patrick, but hopefully there's more content that stayed the same than it looks like in these slides. Kirsten asks, no mention of repeatability or reproducibility. Yes, that is still in there, in addition to those sort of uncertainty, accuracy things. Bridie wants to know, is there logbook style activities in new Edrolo resources related to research methods? I'm going to go through that in a moment, Bridie. I think you'll be excited to see what we've got coming up. Emma, is anyone else daunted by the uncertainty, precision, accuracy bits? Don't worry, Emma. As I said before, the VCAA has been kind enough to at least define these terms for you. So you'll know exactly what the difference is between all of them, but I'm sure you are in very good company with that feeling. So I think there's a couple of questions about logbook activities and area of study 3. So let's jump into that. And then we'll pause once again at the very end to take any final questions from people. So let's start with the macro lens and have a look at the trajectory through all the area of study 3s or areas of study 3. I'm never quite sure about that. We'll start with Unit 1, area of study 3. So you'll notice that there are still area of study 3 for Unit 1, 2, and 4 only. So the focus in Unit 1, area of study 3, is really on research skills. And when I say research skills, I just want to, I guess, clarify that I mean that more theoretical, how to Google things, how to engage in scientific literature, that kind of research skill. So from the study design on page 25, you'll notice it says students select and evaluate a recent discovery, finding, innovation, issue, advance, or case study. So really what they're learning about is what strong evidence looks like, what's validity like in scientific research, and starting to delve into that scientific communication in preparation for when they have to write their own research up. And the topic, it just specifies contemporary topics. So a really important shift to looking at what's happening now in psychology land and looking at really contemporary research. Then in Unit 2, they move from that more theoretical research to practical research. So it's all about conducting a scientific investigation. There they have to form and answer a research question of their own, but they have freedom of presentation. So they can really, you can get them to do a poster in preparation for Year 12, but they don't have to. They could do, you know, a PowerPoint presentation or an essay or any other form of publication really that you as the teacher sees fit. And the topic is that internal, external influences on perception and or behaviour. So focusing on that perception side of the area of study. In Unit 4, the big one, it's the task that is, you know, and love possibly from the last study design, but it has had a couple of updates, which I'll go through. So first and foremost, conducting a scientific investigation and producing a scientific poster, really focusing on that primary data. So students creating a research question and collecting their own data and developing those skills in presenting a scientific poster. And the topic it specifies should be about mental processes and psychological functioning. So this poster is the format is in the study design itself, and the dot points underneath each section are from the descriptions in the study design as well. The word limits are our suggestion. So the word limits don't come from VCAA. They do specify that overall it should be 600 words. So that's quite a reduction from the 1,000 words it was in the last study design. And we've given you a suggestion here on how you may be able to divvy that up. So you can see it's all the sections you're used to: intro, method, results, discussion, and conclusion. The new addition is this bit in the middle here, which is the communication statement, where students report the key finding of the investigation as a one-sentence summary. I guess that sort of mimics almost writing an abstract in a scientific paper, really getting them to distill their findings in one sentence. Otherwise, the content of this task has remained pretty similar. In answer to your question, Bridie, about logbook activities, yes, each Edrolo textbook is going to have an investigation guide for each area of study 3 that will be specific to that area of study 3. So you'll find 2 in your year 11 textbook and 1 in your year 12 textbook. Included in those SVRI guides are explanation of any concepts mapped to the key knowledge dot point. So anything that they really need to know, what does this actually mean in order to be able to do that task? We'll have worked examples as well, and those logbook activities that scaffold the skills that they're going to need. So an example on your screen in front of you is it's a relatively simple one early on, really distinguishing between different variables and writing a solid hypothesis. So students will be taken through those skills step by step, bit by bit, so that when it comes time to doing the task, they've got everything that they need in order to do it successfully. Another example of a logbook activity on the screen in front of you, this one is very much that Unit 1 type activity, really looking at what quality research looks like. So we've got 2 different sources in front of them. We've got the hierarchy of evidence so that they can start thinking about how do we actually evaluate what quality the source is, and we get them to have a look and evaluate which source is better and why. So we're going to be working to include activities like this that build those skills. Okay, before I move on to the assessment changes, any comments, questions, queries, qualms, quandaries, anything at all before we move on? Put them in the Q&A now. Okay, I'm going to push on because I can see that we are getting close to the end. Let's have a look at the assessment changes across the study design. So the exam at the end, used to be 60%. It's now been reduced to be worth 50%, which means your SACs are worth slightly more, 20% in Unit 3 and 30% in Unit 4. Practical activities and scientific investigations have also changed, so there's a minimum of 10 hours of class time, where it used to be sort of 7 to 10, so they're pushing that limit a little bit. And you can see 7 hours minimum at Unit 1 and 2 and 10 hours minimum at Unit 4 for that area of study 3, scientific investigation. And there is an emphasis on using logbooks as well, that is throughout the study design. In terms of SACs, there are a few changes to SACs. You'll notice that there is no more test option. So our multiple choice short answer test is no longer an option for SACs. What I'm going to focus on are the coloured dot points on the screen in front of you, and I'll talk about why they're coloured in a moment. You've got essentially 8 SAC types you can choose for in year 11 and 4 that you can choose from in year 12. So each area of study in year 12 needs to have a different SAC type at the end of it. The ones in year 11, as you can see, the coloured ones map onto some of the ones in year 12. So they're similar, but the year 12 ones are just slightly more in depth. So for example, one of the SAC types is an analysis and evaluation of an experiment or case study. So that's a dot point for year 11. And in year 12, that becomes analysis and evaluation of at least one psychological case study, experiment, model, or simulation. So still really looking at that analysis and evaluation, but extending it to different stimuli. In year 11, you can do a data analysis of generated primary and or collated secondary data. And in year 12, that really becomes analysis and evaluation. So again, pushing those higher order skills. In year 11, you've got the, you'll have seen this on last study design, reflective annotations of a logbook of practical activities. In year 12, it gives you a little bit more guidance on what that means, and it tells you that you need to have a comparison and evaluation of psychological concepts, methodologies, and methods and findings from 3 student practical activities, so including 3 different activities across an area of study. And in year 11, you can have a media analysis of 1 or more contemporary text. In year 12, that becomes 2 or more contemporary texts. So really pushing the comparative element in that media analysis as well. So those are your options. Year 11, you've got a couple other options for SACs as well that are not included in year 12, but the 4 that sort of lead to the year 12 SACs are highlighted there. A quick note on how we're addressing these assessment changes at Edrolo. So every lesson, in addition to our exam style questions, which you know and love, we are also going to have assessment skill questions. Those will sit prior to those exam style questions. These are really short, sharp, low stakes questions that allow students to develop the skills they need for those SATs. So this example here is a text analysis. It is a case study about the gender pay gap and some questions that follow, so they apply the content that they're learning. You'll also notice that we have something called Perfect Your Phrasing, which is a real opportunity to build those literacy skills. It's not a particular SAC type, but it does enable students to really build the skills they need to succeed in exams and SACs alike. In addition to that, on the lesson level, we also have our area of study reviews. So that's for area of study 1 and 2 across units 1 to 4 in both books. That takes the form of an extended practice SAC. So that will be worth about 40 marks in line with the study design. And that will enable your students to really practice those SACs before they have to do it under test conditions. Natalie, I can see a question from you here. Will there be more research method type questions throughout the textbook? Absolutely, not only in our exam style questions, but also throughout activities. You will see us linking the concepts to research methods so that students can practice those. So that will be, you can very much expect that. All right, so that is it from me for now. Coming full circle, I really hope that if you were screaming into the void as a number 1 at the beginning of the session, you're now feeling a little bit more settled and fine with the whole thing. And that we've been able to answer some of the questions that you've had. So thank you for coming. I'm going to pass back over to Clinton.
Yes.
Just to finish
correct.
up.
And we'll just give people another minute or so to put their questions in. I know we'll come back to that textbook one in a second, and we'll probably just hand over to the our team from the client happiness team, our colleagues from the client happiness team, to answer that question about the textbook. And Dion from the client happiness team is going to join us momentarily as well and give us a quick walkthrough of the online platform that some of you will already be using, but in case you're not. But like I said, let's just give people 1 or 2 more moments to put any more questions in. Still stressing, I can imagine. All of those, I'm sure people are going to go through all of those phases of Ross over the next 6 to 8 months, right? Any other questions? Either pop it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. We will be sharing contact details at the end of this, of course, as well. So as Merav said, if you do have a question that comes to you in the middle of the night, you can email us, maybe not in the middle of the night, because we certainly won't be up to answer it, but you can certainly send it through afterwards. We know, as Merav said, it's a lot to take in this afternoon.
Bridie has a question about new content. Is it going to be in the textbook or lots in the online video lessons? Also, you did logbook content only in the textbook. Activities themselves will be available in the textbook, but the video lessons are being remade to align with the new study design. So in terms of I guess when I say content, in terms of the theory content, you will get that across both resources, but logbook content and things like that in the textbook.
Okay, great. I might take over now. Is that all right, Clinton and Merav?
Yep, and people can still put their questions in and we can come back right at the end if we need to, so go for it.
Yeah, of course. Okay, great. Merav, I might just get you to stop sharing your screen so I can take over. That would be wonderful. And I'll be about 5 minutes. I'm just going to take you through what the online platform looks like on Edrolo, if you're not familiar with it, and also how you can get an opportunity to trial the current textbook with your students for the rest of the year for free. So I'll tell you how that works, but I just wanted to cover very, very quickly that we have a bunch of textbooks. So if you teach one of these textbooks other than Psych, you have the opportunity to trial them this year, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a walkthrough of how they look. Whoopsie daisies. We also have a Year 7 resource for science, maths, and not on this screen, but humanities as well. We're currently running 120 trials of this around schools. They are loving this resource. So if this is something you're interested, once again, there'll be a link at the end for you to fill in your details and someone can contact you to arrange a trial. I'm going to give you a quick look at what the platform looks like when you have an Edrolo textbook. So you've just seen a wonderful presentation from Merav showing you what we're incorporating into the new book. Well, this is what it looks like actually on the platform. So you'll notice here, most of you will have either access to the textbook this year, in which case it will be the same, or you have access to the standard Edrolo resource, which are the videos that are linked to the topics, ability to track your class progress, and then sort of formative tests interspersed throughout. When you have access to the textbook course, which is this one here, you'll notice in course materials that you'll get access to the PDF of the textbook, a printable unit plan as well. So if you've got trepidation, I saw in the chat there's teachers with trepidation of switching from one textbook to the other, but also from study design to new study design, then this printable unit plan, which is a Word document that steps out the whole of the textbook to the course, will be super, super handy for you. But what I wanted to show you was from the student perspective, and you might not have seen this sort of before, what it looks like when a student completes a question using the Psych textbook. So I've flicked over to a student account now, and if we go into, I've actually preloaded it, we go into a question. So students can go in, they can answer a multi-choice question, click on save and continue. So one of the benefits of this platform is they get immediate feedback on their answers. But the other benefit is that for the textbook questions, so every question in the textbook, there's a video solution.
It's referring to the role of cortisol that Willow is experiencing while she's bidding.
So you can imagine you can fire off a question to your students and they'll have a video solution that guides them through the answer, and then they indicate whether or not they're confident in their understanding of the question. For the short answer questions, what students can do is they can enter their answers online, and then they get a video solution of a teacher guiding them through the correct answer.
This question is to outline, and we're outlining.
Goes to the command terms and then works through the checklist. So this is a very long checklist actually, because there's lots of components to this question that the student needs to answer. So the student can go through and self-mark their own work. It's also really important to note that the textbook and the online platform, there's total synergy between the two. So I was talking to a teacher last week who was saying, I've got this textbook, it was another publisher's textbook, and it doesn't match up to the Edrolo videos or the questions. Well, there's synergy between the two. So really, there's much less of a barrier we're finding for students completing these questions and also for using the book as well. So that's what the student page looks like. From a teacher perspective, when your students are completing these questions, what you can do is you can see on a per lesson basis, here we've got operant conditioning, on a per lesson basis, whether your students are doing the work, but also whether they're getting the questions right and wrong, but more importantly, whether they're understanding or not understanding the questions. And then you can even go into specific questions and you can see, right, here's a multi-choice question that was asked in the class. Students answered it. Looks like there's some 3 out of 15 students that are having difficulty with this question. And if you can even see who those students are. So that's for the multi-choice questions. And then the short answer questions, I showed you that breakdown before. Well, this is another question. And these students have gone through and checked their answers. 3 students didn't outline how spontaneous recovery occurs in this particular question. And then you can go down and you can see the student answers and then the checklist that they've completed as well. This student indicates that they need help because they've only got one component of the question correct. So that's kind of a quick outline of what you get when you get an Edrolo textbook. If you do want to trial the textbook, this year's study design textbook, what we ask you to do, and it's very easy for us to set up, is that for a topic or two, or an area of study is probably better, set aside your existing textbook, set questions from Edrolo, get your students to complete them, see how you go using that and see how they go using that. And then if you like it and you want to subscribe to the textbook next year, confirm with your Edrolo contact that you're going ahead with the textbook for 2023, and we'll give you access from now until the end of the year for free. So if some of you are thinking, I'm going to jump on this textbook, I'm going to go ahead with it next year, let us know, because your students will get access this year to the PDF of the textbook. We'll send you out a hard copy of the book as well. Yeah, you'll get access to the data and the questions and everything online. If you do a trial, it's usually about an 8-week trial, and you don't want to continue using the textbook for next year, we'll just switch off the access, but at least you get to try it. So this is the fun part. If you want to trial the textbook from this year, head to this URL. I'll get Jess or someone, if they haven't already, to pop this in the chat. So edrolo.com.au/PSYCHPL, or you can scan your phone and that's a QR code there. I'll get you to do this now because we've only got a limited number of trials. So I want to make sure that you're all signed up, and it's essentially just entering your first and last name, school, and someone from Edrolo will contact you either tomorrow or Monday. And yeah, that's how you can sign up to the textbook trial. So I'll just give you a minute.
And Dion, while we're letting people do that, there are a couple of, I think, burning questions in the chat.
Yes.
That we can go to. So let's go back to Melissa's question, which I think you answered, which is there a way that students can see is there a way teachers can see students' short answer responses?
Yep.
I think you covered that off when you showed the short answer section. So hopefully that's answered your question, Melissa. Melissa had another question, which was from much earlier, which was when will the new or the next textbooks be published? Do you have a sense of timeline on that?
Yeah, so our textbooks are published in time for early commencement. So typically in October, November, you'll get a PDF of the textbook, and then they're typically printed for January. And we've been really good at hitting our due date with that.
Great. And Shirley asked a bit earlier, is the layout of the online questions going to change, as my students say it is boring and they do not really like doing the questions because of the format? I think there are changes coming to the platform potentially.
There are changes coming, and there's a raft of changes coming in the next couple of months. Yeah, you will see those changes. I haven't heard that feedback before. Students find the videos really engaging, but yeah, take on board the feedback. And yeah, there are a lot of changes happening to the online platform that you'll see that are super, super exciting.
Madeline also asked about whether the online textbook next year will let her co-mark and give feedback to the students' answers, because currently only this is available on exams. And Madeline ends up using Google Forms to give the feedback.
Yeah, let me just have a look. So Madeline, at the moment, it's something we're actually looking into, and I don't know if that's one of the changes that we're incorporating into these sort of raft of changes the next couple of months. I think that the idea is that students are self-marking their own work, and then you're sort of coming in the back end, you're seeing the answers they've given and whether they're understanding the answers or the questions. I personally think that that's really good feedback, and we'll take note of it. I'd be interested, Madeline, in what sort of feedback you would like to be able to give, whether it's written feedback or audio feedback. Maybe you can send me a message at dion@edrolo.com. I'll paste that in the chat there, and feel free to to shoot me an email, and I'll we can even get our product team to have a chat with you if that's something you're interested in chatting to them about, what sort of feedback you'd be looking to give.
I can see there in there, Dion. And the last question from Louisa about the trial. Is this the same textbook trial as for the classes or just individually? Good
question. Sorry, I don't know if I made that clear. So this is a class trial. So it's completely free. You get sent a book, and it's a trial that you can do with your class. So yeah. And I was just having a look. Patrick mentioned that the trial is awesome. And if your school isn't using it, it's sort of catered to low SES students, and it's really good for differentiating. It almost sounds like Patrick's written our own ad for us. But yeah, a lot of teachers are really, really loving trialing this resource. It's a really kind of rare opportunity to trial it with your class. So I highly recommend going to that URL, typing in your details, and then, yeah, there's no obligation with the trial either. Finally, yeah, a few PL sessions that are coming up. So for general maths, physics, and BizMan, if you want to register, click on the same link that you click to register for this one. Yeah, you're also welcome to pass them on to your colleagues as well. Clinton, was there anything else that you wanted to cover or you wanted me to cover at all?
All good. I just wanted to just make sure that there weren't any final questions for either you or Merav from the group before we wrap up. Conscious that we've gone over by 6 minutes. And again, just want to thank everyone for making time this afternoon to join us online. Hopefully it has been super useful. There will be an email coming out tomorrow or Monday from us, as I said earlier, with your certificate of participation, the slides from tonight, as well as a feedback form. We'd love your feedback on tonight's session so that we can make sure that the PL we're offering is super useful. So any other final question? Shirley's just made a comment, but it doesn't look like anyone's adding anything to the Q&A. So last final call. I think everyone's ready to go home, head home if they're not home already, put on dinner, pick up the kids, sort out the washing, whatever it is that's awaiting you for the fun Thursday evening ahead. But stay safe, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you soon. Take care.